Let me get this straight, I said slowly, choosing every word with care. You're saying the company can't afford a raise after reporting a 27% revenue increase last quarter? My boss, Richard Halloway, leaned back in his leather chair, an amused smile playing on his lips. Behind him, the sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows of our downtown tech headquarters, casting long shadows across the sleek glass table between us. You've done good work, Kira, he said with that patronizing calm I'd come to resent. Really, but let's not kid ourselves. You're a good employee. Nothing more. I stared at him, the words hanging in the air like smoke. 8 years. 8 years of building, debugging, deploying. The software that had become the engine of this company's success. They called it Core Path. Elegant, scalable, fast. It was the reason our biggest clients signed on. And I had written its first line of code. I see, I said quietly. Nothing more. He didn't notice the steel in my voice. Richard was already tapping at his phone. Let's circle back in Q4. Maybe by then the board will be open to revisiting compensation. I stood. I won't need another meeting, Richard. He looked up, puzzled. Excuse me? I said I won't need another meeting. He blinked. Well, don't be dramatic. But I was far from dramatic. I was calm, calculated, focused. He didn't know I had been preparing for this conversation for months. It started with a board memo I wasn't supposed to see. Someone had CC'd me by accident. An internal strategy brief outlining plans to eventually migrate CorePath to an in-house team, phasing out legacy contributors. Legacy contributors. That was me. A polite euphemism for replaceable. I had read every word of that memo with surgical precision, and from that moment I began documenting. My personal laptop, my own servers. Nights and weekends spent quietly refining the architecture of CorePath into something entirely new. Faster, more secure, capable of handling twice the load with half the latency. What Richard didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the original patent for CorePath had never been filed under my name. Back then, I had trusted our legal department to handle it. I was 28, naive, and just grateful someone believed in my work. But the new version? The upgraded version? That one was mine. Filed. Protected. And now fully in my control. Back at my desk, I stared out at the bullpen of programmers and analysts, most half my age, hired long after CorePath had launched, trained on my documentation. Some of them were good. A few were brilliant. But none of them could recreate what I had built. They didn't know the skeleton code. They didn't know the logic traps I'd buried deep in the framework, the safeguards only I could override. It was 4:17 p.m. when the message came in. Board approved it. Offer stands. We'd be honored to have you. Jonathan Marks, CEO, Nexora Technologies. Nexora, our biggest competitor. The one Richard loved to mock in team meetings. Second rate, he'd say, always chasing our tail. But they weren't chasing anymore. I typed my reply without hesitation. Let's meet. I'm ready. That evening, I sat across from Jonathan at a quiet table in a private room at Lakeview Grill. No branding, no logos, just 2 glasses of wine, a folder between us, and 8 years of quiet underestimation on my back. We'll launch it under a new name, Jonathan said, tapping the folder. You'll have full attribution, equity, and C-suite authority over implementation. Signing bonus is in there too. Exclusive rights? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Exclusive, he confirmed. We'll sunset our current infrastructure and replace it with yours. I want Nexora to be the first name people think of in enterprise systems. I opened the folder, skimmed. I had already seen the terms via email, but reading them in print made it real. And the moment I pressed my pen to the page, one signature, steady and deliberate, I felt a shift. Like a quiet explosion no one else could hear. By morning, the earthquake would begin. By the time I arrived at work the next morning, the press release had already gone live. Nexora Technologies acquires exclusive rights to new enterprise framework, Streamline OS, developed by former CorePath architect Kira Morgan. There it was. My name, my work, and a message to everyone who had ever looked past me in meetings, cut me off mid-sentence, or said, "That's a nice idea, but let's hear from someone more senior." Richard hadn't seen it yet. Not at 7:45 a.m. He always came in at 9, coffee in one hand, a condescending nod for the front desk in the other. But others had seen it. I could tell the moment I stepped onto the engineering floor. Conversations hushed. Heads turned. More than one pair of eyes followed me all the way to my office. There was something in the air, a ripple of something unspoken. Anticipation? Respect? Fear? I sat down, opened my laptop, and sipped my coffee in silence. I didn't need to speak. The article was already doing the talking. At 9:03 a.m., Richard stormed into my office without knocking, holding his phone in one hand and a printout of the press release in the other. His face was flushed, part anger, part confusion. "What the hell is this?" I looked up calmly. "Good morning." "Don't play games, Kira. Is this real?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. "Yes, it's real. Nexora has exclusive rights to the new platform. My platform." His voice rose. "You mean our platform? You've been on salary for 8 years. Any code you developed?" "On company time," I interrupted. "Using company resources?" "Sure. That's CorePath. This," I tapped the press release, "was developed independently. On my own servers, on my own time. And it's not CorePath. It's better. It's more efficient. It scales faster, it secures better, and it just made your biggest competitor a market leader overnight." He stared at me like I'd slapped him. "You blindsided me." "No, Richard. I asked for a raise. You told me I was nothing more than a good employee. I'm just treating that evaluation with the seriousness it deserves." By noon, the first cracks had begun to show. A client representative from Hallway Financial, one of our largest accounts, emailed support with a simple question. "Is your current platform affected by Nexora's announcement?" Legal scrambled. Marketing called an emergency sync. Richard disappeared into the boardroom with the CTO and came out pale and tight-lipped. I knew what they were figuring out, piece by piece. That the backbone of CorePath, the logic trees, the load balancer algorithms, the adaptive memory caching, was all inspired by my independent work. Work that, until now, they had quietly relied on without truly understanding. What scared them wasn't just the loss of exclusivity. It was the realization that they never really owned the future of their own product. I did. That afternoon, I sent a message to Sarah, the junior developer who had once pulled me aside after a company meeting to say thank you for standing up for her idea when no one else would. "If things get messy, and they will, just know I have your back. Stay professional, stay out of the chaos. But when the time comes, I'll be in a position to offer you something better." She replied within minutes. "I'm ready." At 4:30 p.m., a company-wide email went out. "We are aware of today's industry developments. Please rest assured that our leadership team is reviewing the situation and will provide clarity shortly. In the meantime, continue business as usual." Business as usual. The phrase had never sounded so hollow. A minute later, I received a meeting request. "Richard Halloway invites you to confidential IP discussion, urgent, 5:15 p.m. I didn't decline. I didn't accept. I just closed my laptop, picked up my bag, and walked out. I wasn't going to explain myself twice. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip below the skyline, painting the buildings in gold. I exhaled slowly as I walked to the parking garage. My car, an old silver Civic with a coffee stain on the seat, looked out of place next to the luxury SUVs and corporate-issued sedans. But I didn't mind. Let them laugh. I wouldn't be driving it much longer. As I pulled out into traffic, my phone buzzed. A message from Jonathan at Nexora. The first investor calls came in. Stock jumped 8% today. Our legal team says your documentation is bulletproof. You ready for the next phase? I smiled as the light turned green. I've been ready for years. By Monday morning, the situation at Quantex Solutions had gone from confusion to full-blown panic. Though I'd already submitted my resignation on Friday, I knew the real fallout would start once the stock market opened. And right on cue, the first dip came at 9:14 a.m. A 3% drop in value after the Nexora press release made its way into the inboxes of analysts and investors. By 10 a.m., it was all anyone could talk about. Halberd Financial paused all new implementation of CorePath. Dynatech, another enterprise client, demanded a meeting with Quantex's CTO. And then came the real blow. Triarch Systems, our second biggest customer, requested a comprehensive audit of code ownership and intellectual property associated with the CorePath platform. Translation: they were worried about a lawsuit, or worse, about running illegal code. At 10:47 a.m., I got a text from Sarah, just one word: nuclear. I smiled faintly as I stepped into the elevator at Nexora's headquarters. 10 floors up, I was met by a sleek silver nameplate: Kira Morgan, VP of Advanced Systems. It still didn't feel entirely real. Inside my new office, a vase of white lilies sat on the desk with a handwritten card from Jonathan. Today 1, let's change the industry. By noon, I had 3 missed calls from Quantex, 1 from Richard, 2 from his assistant, all unanswered. I wasn't being petty. I was being strategic. Every call they placed was a reminder that they no longer had control of the narrative, or the future of the software they had built their success on. A 4th call came in, this one from a private number. I let it ring. Moments later, a voicemail appeared. I played it on speaker as I reviewed the latest client acquisition numbers from Nexora's sales team. Kira, this is Victor Patel, Quantex Legal. We need to have a conversation about CorePath. We believe there's been a misunderstanding about derivative works and the timeline of your contributions. Please call me back. We'd prefer to resolve this quietly. Quietly. Of course they would. At 1:30 p.m., I joined Jonathan and Nexora's general counsel in the boardroom for our scheduled strategy session. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Quantex's legal department reached out already, Jonathan said, sliding a folder toward me. As expected. They're throwing around the phrase derivative work, but they're hesitant. They know you've covered your bases. I opened the folder and skimmed the response draft. It was precise, calm, and unshakable. Every line of the document made it clear that I had full ownership of the new platform, and that Nexora had acquired the rights with full legal documentation and audit trails. They don't know whether to sue or to beg, I said quietly. Jonathan nodded. They'll try both. Back at Quantex, things were unraveling faster than I had predicted. Sarah messaged again. Legal is pulling your old laptop. They're trying to recover internal code traces. Everyone's nervous. Someone asked if we're going to be sued just for using the system. I replied, tell your team not to worry. You've all done nothing wrong. The problem isn't using it. It's trying to own it when you didn't build it. By Tuesday morning, Triarch Systems had officially frozen their contract, a $2.1 million deal, suspended. Quantex's board called an emergency executive session. According to Sarah, Richard didn't speak for the first 15 minutes. When he finally did, it was only to say, we underestimated her. Damn right they did. That afternoon, Nexora's media team published a feature interview with me in Tech Review Weekly. The headline read, The Woman Who Wrote the Future, How Kira Morgan Reinvented Enterprise Software. It went viral within an hour. By the time I finished reading the article aloud to Jonathan, our PR inbox had already received 4 invitations for me to speak at national tech conferences. 2 were ones that had declined my speaking applications just a year earlier. Funny how quickly things changed. At 4:58 p.m., my phone lit up again. Richard. This time, he sent a message. We need to talk. Please. You know we've always respected you. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't pound. I just felt Still. Respect, I murmured to myself, dropping the phone on my desk. If they'd truly respected me, they would have protected my work. They would have seen me for more than just a good employee. They would have valued the mind behind the machine, not just the machine itself. But now, it was too late. I wasn't just the one who had written the code. I was the one who had rewritten the rules. By Wednesday morning, the cracks had turned into fractures. Quantex's stock had dropped another 5%, and the board had called its third closed-door session in 48 hours. Their executive team was spinning, desperate for a path forward that didn't involve admitting what they already knew. They had built their entire success on something they no longer controlled. And now they were scrambling to recover ground they had already lost. At 9:12 a.m., I received an email from Quantex's legal counsel. This time, the tone was no longer cautious. It was threatening. Subject: pending IP infringement concerns. Kira, it is our belief that components of the Streamline OS platform may share derivative architecture with CorePath. We are prepared to initiate legal proceedings should licensing discussions not be opened immediately. Regards, Victor Patel, General Counsel, Quantex Solutions. There it was, the bluff. The panic behind the polished tone. I forwarded the email to Nexora's legal team with a simple note. Expected. Proceed as discussed. We had already built our defense weeks ago. I had detailed logs, version history, proof of independent development on non-company equipment, and a clear paper trail separating Streamline OS from the version they had let rot under corporate neglect. They could try to sue, but they wouldn't win. And deep down, they knew that. By mid-morning, Jonathan walked into my office with a quiet grin. They blinked, he said, placing a folder on my desk. It was a draft of Quantex's licensing proposal. Less of an offer and more of a white flag. They're offering a temporary license on CorePath's existing modules, he explained, to buy time for internal restructuring. They're also proposing private arbitration. No public admission of fault. I raised an eyebrow. So they want to keep using tech based on my innovations, while pretending it was never mine? Exactly, Jonathan said. They'll pay, but they don't want to lose face. I leaned back in my chair and stared out the window. They already have. That afternoon, I called Sarah. You remember when we talked last year about what it would be like to build something without all the noise? I asked. She laughed softly. Yeah. You said you wanted to make a place where good ideas didn't die in conference rooms. I wasn't joking, I said, and I'm building it now. There was a pause. Then, are you offering me a role? I'm offering you a future, a team, ownership. You in? Another pause, just long enough to feel the weight of it. I'm in. By the end of the day, 4 more of my former colleagues had reached out, either directly or through mutual contacts. Developers, engineers, even someone from the product team. All of them had one thing in common. They'd been overlooked, dismissed, or quietly silenced at Quantex. They were ready for something more. Nexora didn't hesitate. Jonathan greenlit senior-level offers for all of them. Full benefits, signing bonuses, and most importantly, attribution. Not just another name in a directory. Not just supporting staff. People who mattered. Meanwhile, back at Quantex, the fear was spreading. Sarah sent me another update that evening. All-hands meeting at 4 p.m. was a disaster. They tried to reassure everyone, but someone asked what happens if the license deal falls through. Legal had no answer. Richard looked pale. People are updating their resumes during lunch breaks. Another message followed 10 minutes later. 3 mid-level engineers gave notice today. 2 of them were on the CorePath maintenance team. They weren't just losing code. They were losing knowledge, the kind that couldn't be rebuilt from documentation alone. That night, I stayed late at the office. Alone in the conference room, I sketched out the architecture for Streamline OS v2, a fully modular framework with dynamic scalability and integrated machine learning adaptability. The kind of system that didn't just process data but learned from it in real time. It was what CorePath should have become, if they'd only listened. When I finally packed up and stepped out into the cool night air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of staying silent to keep the peace, but the peace that comes from standing up, walking away, and building something better. The next morning, I got a text from Sarah. They're calling it the Kira effect now. Engineers are saying Quantex should have made you CTO years ago. I didn't reply right away, but I smiled, because what they called it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that they finally knew who had built the foundation they were standing on, and who had taken it with her when she left. By Monday, Quantex was in survival mode. The board issued an internal mandate: halt all public communication, freeze spending on external vendors, and avoid media contact until the legal department fully assessed exposure. In other words, they were circling the wagons, and it wasn't working. The licensing deal they had proposed on Friday had quietly expired when Nexora's legal team refused to grant extensions without public attribution. That clause was non-negotiable. If they wanted to use any element of my software architecture, they would have to acknowledge the truth. They'd rather burn than admit what I built for them. And they were proving it. One costly mistake at a time. Sarah texted me at 10:14 a.m. Richard's out, resigned this morning. No press yet. Interim CEO is Claire Reynolds from operations. I wasn't surprised. Richard had led the company straight into an avoidable crisis. His ego had made him blind. His dismissal of my request for a raise had cost him his job, and possibly the future of the company. Quantex hadn't just lost leadership. They'd lost direction. Without a clear roadmap or access to the evolved Streamline OS architecture, their development teams were struggling to maintain CorePath's existing infrastructure. Reports of lag, system crashes, and delayed patch updates were beginning to pile up from clients. I watched from a distance as the empire I helped build began to crumble under its own weight. At Nexora, we were doing the opposite. That same morning, I stood at the front of a glass-walled conference room with Sarah, James, Aisha, and my newly formed advanced systems team seated around the table. Each of them had walked away from comfort and job titles to join something with vision. On the whiteboard behind me, I outlined Streamline OS v2, a platform that wouldn't just serve enterprise clients but empower them. Self-healing architecture, predictive analytics, an open API framework that could be licensed to multiple industries. What's the target timeline? Aisha asked. 6 weeks to full beta, I said. 3 months for deployment. James raised an eyebrow. That's ambitious. It's aggressive, I corrected. But doable, especially with this team. We hit the ground running. Every day was a sprint. Design reviews, test case iterations, back-end optimization. But it wasn't chaos. It was momentum. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to fight to be heard in my own field. And neither did anyone else in the room. Ideas were met with curiosity, not criticism. Questions were welcomed. Contributions were credited. Nexora didn't just want to use my algorithm, they wanted to build around it. Meanwhile, industry news sites had begun reporting the internal shakeups at Quantex. Rumors swirled, investors whispered, and one headline finally said what so many inside the company had been thinking for years. Quantex built its kingdom on innovation, then pushed the innovator out. By Thursday, the tech blog Inside Engine published a scathing exposé titled The Kira Effect: How a Dismissed Engineer Outmaneuvered a Giant. It detailed my departure, the software dispute, and Nexora's swift rise in the market. And still, Quantex remained silent. They couldn't risk a public rebuttal that might trigger legal exposure. So instead, they stalled. Their silence, ironically, was the loudest confession of all. At 3:42 p.m., Sarah forwarded me a company-wide memo from Quantex's interim CEO. To address ongoing concerns, Quantex will be reassigning current engineering leads and implementing a new organizational model to better align with industry expectations. Translation: they were gutting the teams, Again. I sent Sarah a quick reply. You made the right move. She responded with a gif of someone sprinting away from an explosion. I laughed for the first time in weeks. The next day, Nexora's demo of Streamline OS v2 went live. We invited select enterprise partners for a closed session, industry leaders, tech influencers, and 2 former Quantex clients who had quietly reached out asking if we could support their migration. The demo ran seamlessly. When I walked through the adaptive analytics dashboard and showed how the system could adjust in real time to user load changes, the room fell silent. Then came applause. Not polite applause. Real, impressed, we just saw the future applause. As I wrapped up, Jonathan joined me at the front of the room. I think it's safe to say, he said with a proud smile, this changes everything. And it did. Not just because of the software, but because of the people behind it. People who had once been dismissed as support, junior, or not ready. Now they were the architects of something better. That evening, over dinner with the team, Sarah raised her glass. To second chances, she said. I clinked my glass with hers. No, I replied. To finally getting what we always deserved. Exactly 4 weeks after Quantex turned down my request for a raise, I received a certified letter from their legal department. It was the kind of envelope you recognize before it even hits your hand. Thick paper, embossed logo, return address stamped in sharp legal font. But I didn't feel nervous as I opened it. I already knew what was inside. It was an offer to license Streamline OS. This time, the tone was different. Measured, respectful, and far more generous than before. They were finally willing to pay, and more importantly, to publicly acknowledge my role as the original architect behind CorePath's foundation. Their desperation had finally outweighed their pride. That same day, Nexora's stock hit an all-time high after we announced our first 5 enterprise clients had completed successful migrations to Streamline OS v2. The software wasn't just working, it was outperforming everything on the market. What we had built together in just under a month was sending shockwaves through the tech industry. Everyone's watching us now, Jonathan said during our leadership huddle. Quantex thought they could bury innovation. They just gave it a louder microphone. At 2 p.m., I joined a video call with Nexora's legal team to review the licensing proposal. I had no intention of dragging out litigation. We'd already won in every way that mattered. But I wanted one thing written in bold, black ink. Attribution. Not buried in fine print. Not mentioned once in a quarterly memo. A permanent public acknowledgement that I was the creator of the architecture they had built their empire on. I want it stated on their website, in the product documentation, and in every future investor brief that references the CorePath system, I told our lead counsel. No negotiation. Already in the response draft, she said without missing a beat. They don't have much leverage left. The next morning, I received a call from Claire Reynolds, Quantex's interim CEO. Her tone was calm, polished, professional. Kira, she said, first, I want to congratulate you on what you've built. Nexora's rollout has been impressive to watch. I waited. I also want to apologize for how you were treated here. We failed to recognize your contributions when it mattered most. That's on us. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Thank you, I said. Acknowledgement goes a long way. There was a pause on her end, like she was weighing her next words carefully. We're going to accept the licensing terms, including the attribution clause. I've signed off on it personally. Then we're in agreement, I said. By Friday, the official statement went live on Quantex's homepage. We are pleased to announce a strategic licensing agreement with Nexora Technologies for use of the Streamline OS framework, originally developed by Dr. Kira Morgan. We recognize her foundational contributions to enterprise system architecture and look forward to continued innovation in partnership with Nexora. There it was, my name, in full. After 8 years of being sidelined, erased, and referred to only as a key team member, they finally said my name. I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't want revenge. I just felt seen. Later that afternoon, Nexora hosted a celebration for the Streamline OS launch. The rooftop was full of energy. Engineers, executives, new hires, even a few clients who had flown in to shake hands with the people behind the platform. Sarah found me near the glass railing, watching the city skyline fade into twilight. "They're already calling it the fastest tech turnaround in industry history," she said, holding a glass of sparkling cider. "From idea to adoption in 4 weeks." I looked at her and smiled. Sometimes the things we build in silence speak the loudest. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, Jonathan raised a glass to toast the team. "To innovation," he said, "and to the people who dare to believe in their own value, even when no one else sees it yet." I felt the eyes on me, not with pressure, but with warmth, with respect.